Hi, welcome to the Worthy Physician Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Sapna Shah Haq, a board-certified internal medicine physician. Keep life simple. You are human. You are worthy. Remember what matters to you. Our goal is to help physicians remember this and to make it a reality through addressing various components of physician burnout via podcast. This is meant to be used as a tool to help guide physicians. It does not take place of professional medical help. Opinions reflected in this are my own. Today on episode 5, we will be talking again with Dr. Bob Bean, physio psychologist, about physician burnout and physiology. The previous episode, we discussed how burnout and stress act on us physiologically. And in this episode, we dive further into how to counteract that, be more aware, and what we can do to really check in with ourselves. Please visit our website at worthyphysician.com and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram.
Okay, so kind of coming back to this whole idea is what do we do about it, right? So we've got to be aware. The first, we're going through these different stages all the time, right? Whether it's the ventral vagal where we feel safe and comfortable, whether it's the fight mode or it's the flight mode, the sympathetic branch, or we're kicked clear over in that protective parasympathetic where things are just shutting down.
Sure.
And we're moving back and forth through all those all the time.
And I think you used a good example of what we're very familiar with, right? You're driving, and then there's a siren.
Yeah, so let's say you're driving and you just had a nice breakfast with your family. You had a great weekend. You're just driving into work or whatever. You're in this nice, calm, feeling pretty balanced kind of ventral vagal state, and now there's the siren behind you, police car, lit up, and now you're moving into fight or flight mode, right? For me, it's going to be the flight mode, right? Because I'm going to be more anxious and scared. Other people get into fight mode, it gets them into trouble, but they, I'm going to be in flight mode. So now you're stressed, right? And then they go around you and they're going after something else, right? And then you come back down. So we're constantly moving throughout these modes all throughout the day. And so there's this, and most of the time it's below, because we're constantly managing or assessing threat. Right? We're always looking for threat, and it's at a subconscious level. There's what Porges called neuroception. And so, it's like I say, even with people, we talked about people that you work with and that kind of thing. Even with people, we're constantly assessing this thing. It's at a subconscious level. Like I said, we've got 42 facial muscles that express emotion non-verbally.
Right.
Chimpanzees only have 23. Right.
That's fascinating.
We're totally different.
Because when you go through the zoo, you
Yeah.
look at the exhibit and you see the different facial expressions and what they mean. So, you just augment that with humans.
Yeah. So think about, all of that, how sensitive we are to reading other people. Right? And so this is a neuroception kind of thing. It is below our awareness that we're constantly looking. And so, like I say, I tell my patients, have you ever watched a squirrel or a bunny in your yard or a deer in the field? Because what happens? They're constantly checking and they're on alert and they're, kind of twitchy and all that kind of stuff. We're the same way. We just are a little less overt about it, but we're constantly assessing threat.
Right.
Constantly assessing threat. And so, because we are created to survive first and foremost.
Sure.
That is what we have to do. To get anything else done, we have to stay safe. We have to survive. So we're constantly assessing that. So we have to pay attention then as we move throughout the day or the week or the month from this dorsal vagal of safety and warmth and comfortable and feeling good to fight or flight, where and again, that's not bad, right? Where I'm responding to challenges. Going into fight or flight is a good thing if you're responding to a code blue.
Right.
Right? You don't want
Absolutely.
to. You don't want to be in ventral and just like, oh, this is great. Yeah, this is all good. You got to be on your game.
Right.
So you perform better, right? The problem is when we stay there.
Yeah.
And then we blast into that dorsal vagal and we're just overloaded and overwhelmed and we start to shut down emotionally and physically. So we've got to know where we are. Okay? So after we are starting to be better at recognizing where we are, right? And it's like you said before, sometimes physicians aren't very good at that, right? Because you're so used to driving that race car. You habituate to that level, right?
I mean, it's literally brought on to us early on during medical school, residency, and then it's carried out through practice by becoming an attending, fellowship, whatever.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. That's the way it always has been. And if you don't do it this way, you are really ostracized. You're kind of shunned.
Shunned from the group.
Right.
Right? Which is what we're afraid of from that polyvagal theory, right? We need the group.
Right.
So if I'm going to be shunned from the group, all of a sudden my safety net is now gone too. And oh my gosh, that just makes things worse. And it just snowballs on us, right? So that's why it's kind of taught, and that's part of why physicians aren't very good at paying attention to these cues of their body, either physically or emotionally. Right. They just ignore it and blow through it.
I mean, it's fine
until you get to burnout.
Yeah, it's fine until it's not.
It's fine until it's not, and then you get to burnout, and that's why the burnout numbers are so high. That's why the suicides get high, right? That's why all these things get high.
Right.
So it's one of the things I started to talk about maybe earlier and didn't get out is this whole thought about depression and anxiety. And we want to kind of separate endogenous versus exogenous depression and anxiety. So exogenous depression and anxiety is reactive depression, reactive anxiety. We are responding to events outside of us that lead us to feel depressed, sad, down, or anxious.
Sure.
Endogenous is more that biochemical, right? Okay, my serotonin levels, those kinds of things, right? So it's more that biological depression. So we can have one or the other, and one can beget the other. One can create the other.
Sure.
Right? So where that comes in with burnout isn't necessarily depression or anxiety. There can be elements of depression and anxiety because the exogenous portion may or may not kick off an endogenous anxiety or depression, which is more biochemical, right? So kind of being able to tease out the difference of those. How do we know, right? Well, we don't necessarily want to medicate every depression and anxiety because it's not all endogenous. Let's also look at what are the environmental issues at play here, because this might be exogenous, and if we solve some of these, if we can, some of that anxiety and depression may get better. If we get back into balance, get into ventral vagal, we do some things to help us feel better, maybe we don't have endogenous depression. It doesn't need medicine.
Sure.
Right? Maybe we don't need that medication. I'm good.
Okay. So let me ask you that. Before we address that, gosh, I mean, if the hours, depending on the specialty, can be insane.
Right.
So for somebody that's always on the go, how do you if anybody's interested in tapping into, hey, where am I at today? Kind of going along the theory of mindfulness. Yeah. How would you recommend, number one, how long do I have to spend on mindfulness? Because, I'm busy. So it's got to be something that I can do, like a walk from the elevator to ICU.
Yeah, yeah. And it can be that simple. Mindfulness doesn't have to be meditation.
Okay.
Mindfulness. So if we think about mindfulness, mindfulness is just being present in this moment without a lot of judgment, right? So we can turn that into meditation and practice it. And the benefit to that is when we do mindfulness meditation, our brain wires as it fires. So the more we practice it, and the more we practice, because our brain's going to wander while we're doing the meditation. So every time our brain wanders off, it's like this little puppy dog that goes off to all these places, right? And every time we bring that puppy dog back to our lap, that is, I call it the bicep curl of meditation. That's where we get stronger, because then our brain wires as it fires. And the more we practice that, the better we get at staying in this moment at other times.
Okay.
Right? So that's the benefit of meditation. But we can do that without spending hours of meditation every day or week, right? We can just be more mindful. And a nice thing to do there is to have some triggers for you, or some cues for you, is to check in with yourself at certain times. There was a great research study. I can't remember now who did it. I want to say Stanford. That may be wrong. But where they just simply had physicians check in with themselves, be mindful of the moment right before they went in to go see the patient. Physician satisfaction went up, patient satisfaction went up, and outcomes went up just by that simple practice of checking in. Because what happened, otherwise, what are our brains are thinking ahead or thinking back or spinning around and just not being present.
Making sure that I didn't miss anything on the
list. Exactly.
This patient I'm going to see, what am I going to see next after this? What's walking through the door?
Exactly.
Who's going to call me next, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm going to pause there and say, one thing that we know about physician burnout is that we're exactly not that. We are not present in the moment because of the disassociation.
Yeah, you're starting to shut down. Right.
So we're in that I need to fix this mode. I need to shut down because this is overwhelming.
Yeah.
So patient satisfaction scores is a completely
that's a whole nother thing, right? Yeah.
Different thing.
Yeah.
But physician satisfaction.
Yeah.
And better outcomes. I'm assuming for both patients and for physicians, correct?
Right.
So how do I walk me through what that would look like in like 30 seconds?
Well, what we have to first do is be aware of this neurology that we've been talking about.
Okay.
Right? We've got to be very aware of our autonomic nervous system. And then we've got to start recognizing where our autonomic nervous system is at any one moment. One of the best ways to do that is have an anchor word for that. What is my anchor word for when I am in fight mode? How would I best describe that? What is my word for when I'm in flight mode? What is my word when I'm in shutdown mode? What is my word when I'm in nice ventral? Have a word for that. Identify what this is. And that makes it easier to cue into it when it happens.
So we kind of have to say, hey, it's just good for me to know where I'm at, just generally
throughout the day, right? All the time. Yeah.
And then
identify that.
Okay.
Give it a label, right? So it's not so vague, right? Because as smart as we are as human beings, we're really not very smart. And the more tangible things are, the more objective things are, the better we understand them and remember them, right? So, object permanence develops way late in our development, and there's and for some people not at all, So.
For sure.
And so the more we stick to what's really tangible, the better it works for us. Okay. So putting a label on it helps.
So walk me through this.
Yeah.
Take me by the hand and walk me through this, right? So I'm getting ready to go see a patient.
Yeah.
And I know that this patient that's my 4 o'clock patient. Man, this is the 4th back pain of the day. I'm just kind of over it, right? I've seen 20 patients. My pager keeps going off. I have 3 admits. I have a consult, and after the office, I'm going to go over to the hospital. Now, this is not my reality, but this is many people's reality.
Right.
So, how would I describe, like for myself, I would describe this as kind of happy-go-lucky. And then the fight or flight, standoffish.
So which is it? That's the thing, right? We got to check in. Okay, am I feeling the fight?
Right.
So am I irritable? Am I grouchy? Am I short-tempered? Am I on edge? That's more fight mode, right?
Right.
Okay. Or am I a little anxious? Am I, just avoiding, wanting to avoid this interaction? That's more flight mode,
Sure.
right? Am I just not wanting to do it and just get me home? That's more dorsal vagal shutdown mode,
Okay.
right? So we got to be aware of where we are.
Sure.
Now, as we are aware of, and you're probably going to have patterns with that.
Sure.
Right? Some people are going to be more fight people, some people are going to be flight people, and eventually we're all shutdown people. But understanding kind of what is happening and seeing it happen as it comes up, right? So if you are in flight mode, what are things that we do, right? So if we're in flight mode, well, let's back up. If we're in shutdown mode, now we've kind of blown through fight or flight.
Yes.
Right? What do we do? So at that point, we've got to start to. Now you're not going to be able to do it at work, but you recognize that, okay, I am getting burned out. I am getting into shutdown mode. What do I need to do?
Right.
So I need to do things like diminish my external stimulation. Right? I may need some alone time.
Sure.
I may need to be in nature. So the Japanese have done a lot of great research on the psychological and physiological benefits of being in nature.
Right.
In fact, they've started to build more and more green space in their cities because they recognize the value of it. And there's some great books about that. So being in nature can be very beneficial, right? So maybe spending some more time at that. We want an environment that's not harsh, that's not loud, that's not sharp, that's not bright, just the opposite of a hospital, right? Right? So you know that you're getting into that burnout mode, right? That dorsal vagal. So I know that I'm going to need to add some time in those other modes to help me recover. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to spend some more time doing that. Maybe this evening I sit outside, on my patio with my family, with my clan, and I reconnect with all that to help me not get overwhelmed, right? So I'm shutting down some of that stimulus, right? If I'm in that flight mode, if I'm in that scared mode, that anxious mode, right, then that's where the breathing stuff comes in. That's where the autonomic nervous system. So that gets us into a whole nother rabbit hole, right? So we start doing diaphragmatic breathing. Mm-hmm. What happens with diaphragmatic breathing? So with the diaphragmatic breathing, we're breathing with that diaphragm, that dome, for those that aren't clinical, that dome-shaped muscle underneath our lungs on top of our stomach is going up and down. And when I breathe in, my diaphragm flattens. That's to make more room for my lungs. And then when I breathe out, the diaphragm comes back up, right? So it's moving up and down. And so that's why we call it belly breathing, and that belly's moving back and forth, right? Because as the diaphragm flattens, all that stuff has to go somewhere, so it goes out. They'll always say, I do think it would be really good for Steven Spielberg to make a creature where they breathe out of their back, because that would be cool. Because we can't, because we have a spine, right? But if their belly went back like that, that'd be cool. Anyway, I'm off track. So anyway, so the diaphragm's doing that. What happens when we breathe that way? Well, the heart then starts to join in. So the heart starts to get into what we call respiratory sinus arrhythmia, meaning it speeds up when I breathe in and it slows down when I breathe out. So it gets in this nice sine wave where it's speeding up and slowing down. When our heart gets into respiratory sinus arrhythmia, our heart actually has more nerves talking to the brain than the brain to the heart. So guess what happens when my heart starts joining my breath and gets in concert with that diaphragmatic breathing, and it's speeding up and slowing down with that diaphragm movement? It sends a message back to the brain, and guess which nerve it activates? The vagus nerve. Kicks in the rest of that parasympathetic stuff. So that's why if we're in flight mode, anxious mode, that soft belly breathing, slow, deep belly breathing is helpful because it's going to kick in that vagus nerve, calm us down, get us out of that scared kind of moment, right? Mm-hmm. So that can be really helpful. Other nice, that's where the, getting involved in other activities like, that's where the Tai Chi and those kinds of things can be helpful for people when they're involved in those kinds of. I always tell people every stress management technique, whether it's Tai Chi or yoga or meditation or deep belly breathing or progressive muscle relaxation or you name it, they all are doing the same thing.
Sure.
They're addressing this autonomic dysfunction that we're talking about.
Right.
There's three things out of this automatic nervous system that we have control over. Because it's automatic. It's autonomic nervous system, right?
Right.
We have three things that we have control over. We have control, because I say they're wired dually. Number one is our breathing. Most of the time it's automatic, thank God. We don't have to think about our breathing. But it's also wired for voluntary. So if I want to take a deep breath, I can. Mm-hmm. So it's wired both ways. Okay? Muscle tension is the second one. It's wired both ways. Most of the time our muscle tension is involuntary. You and I are able to sit here at this table and not topple over because our muscles are making little adjustments all the time.
For sure.
So we don't fall over. But I don't have to think about it. It's autonomic.
Right.
Okay? Or if somebody swings at me, I flinch and it's autonomic, right? But if I want to flex a muscle, I can, right? So it's wired dually. So I have control over those two things. Mm-hmm. The third thing I have control over in this autonomic nervous system is where I put my head, the thinking part. Because if I think about stressors, my body responds as if I'm in the stressor.
Right.
If I think about the ventral vagal kind of stuff, right, where I'm happy, I'm content, it's my safe place, my people, my dog, my whatever is nice and warm and comfortable and safe, then my parasympathetic kicks in, my vagus nerve kicks in. So I've got those three tools that I have voluntary control over, and every technique in the world uses those three tools. It doesn't matter if it's Tai Chi, yoga, progressive muscle relaxation, meditation. All they're doing is some version of adjusting your muscle tension, your breath, and where you're putting your head.
Right.
So pick what you like. If that's meditation, if it's yoga, if it's Tai Chi, if it's running, if it's jogging, whatever it is, they're all the same. They do the same thing. Pick it and stick with that.
I mean, it's amazing that they've been around for decades for a reason.
Thousands of years, right? Yeah, for a reason, because this is how we are wired. Right.
It's kind of cool that you can even do Tai Chi on the Oculus.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's there.
It's there. It's there. Yeah. And so we've slowly in Western society started to, because now we have the science to show it, because I can now show in a biofeedback room your heart rate variability, and I can show what happens when we start doing that your little blood vessels in your fingers start to dilate because you just got into nice coherent heart rate variability. We've got the science to show it. Now we believe it. Right. Even though they've been doing it 4,000 years ago, but now we believe it, right? So we've got to be aware of where we are. Mm-hmm. If we are in that shutdown mode, then it is getting away from the harsh places, the loud, all that kind of stuff, getting into that cocoon, if you will, with our people in nature, quiet, allow ourselves to recover. If we're in that flight mode, it's the breathing, it's the parasympathetic, typical parasympathetic kinds, whatever your flavor is, right? If we are in fight mode, same kinds of things, but sometimes it helps to set boundaries, right?
How do you do that?
Well, that can be a lot of different ways. But for some people, it is martial arts types of things that set boundaries. For some people, it is distance. Okay, so let's go to COVID. So for me personally, I would go into a grocery store and there'd be somebody not wearing a mask, right? For me, with my immune system, which is impaired, that was a threat to me.
Yes.
And I would immediately get really angry, right? At this person.
Right.
because they're essentially, in my mind, they're threatening my life.
Right.
Right? So I'm in fight mode. And I have these fantasies of yelling at them or punching them or doing whatever. But what do? I set the boundary of distance.
Okay.
Okay? So, because I would go to jail if I punched them. So, thankfully my brain stopped me from doing those kinds of things. And instead I set the distance. And so I set a boundary, a physical boundary of I'm not going to be near this threat. Okay? So, however you can set those boundaries can be helpful if you're in that fight mode.
Sure.
Right? But again, sometimes that's why some people really respond well to martial arts training and those kinds of things. They are more tend to go into that fight mode and they get angry quickly and they're irritable all the time. Those kind of folks, they tend to really like studying a martial arts, right? And they're setting boundaries and they can do that and that helps them restabilize and feel safe, right? So that's one way to do that. Physical activity can help. Burning that off. If we're in fight mode, then sometimes just burning the energy. You got epinephrine, norepinephrine, right? So there's adrenaline surge, so let's burn it off. Okay, so that's the swimming, the running, the jogging, the walking, those kinds of things. We can burn that off and work out some of that fight kind of stuff and help us get back to more of a homeostasis, so that can be helpful. The last thing I would say about what do you do is then I think you have to really assess several arenas of your life. Okay, and so I like to break this down into 4 basic arenas. Besides eating and sleeping, what do? We work, we play, we have a social life, and we have a family life.
Correct.
So we've got 4 boxes, if you will, of activities that we do. And then I like to encompass all of those under one big arena or one big box of spirituality, because our spiritual beliefs and our spirituality guides us in the choices that we make in each of those 4 arenas. So one of the things that we can do if we are experiencing burnout, if we are having distress, physical or emotional, because our bucket is overflowing like we talked about, is to sit down and look at these 4 arenas in the spirituality, so 5, and look at Deb Dana is a therapist who really has done a lot with polyvagal theory, and she talks about triggers and glimmers. And triggers are things that trigger us towards fight or flight and eventually burnout. And glimmers are the things that help us get into ventral vagal, things that feel good. And so if we look at these 4 arenas that I have come up with, which is, again, it's I'm going to spend time with family, I'm going to spend time with others, I'm going to work, and I'm going to play. Now there's overlap between those, because sometimes when we play with others, sometimes when we play, we do it with family, sometimes we work, we play. There's an overlap.
Right, sure.
So we know that when we do one, it can affect the others.
Yes.
But it can be really helpful then to look at each of those boxes and say, and there has to be a balance between those boxes. And if I don't have a good balance between those in terms of my activities, then there's more water going into that bucket we talked about instead of coming out. And so sometimes if I get out of balance, if I start feeling bad and I start having symptoms of distress, I've got to sit down and do an analysis of, okay, what's out of balance? You'll probably have a pattern to that.
Sure.
So for me, the pattern is always work box gets too big, play box starts to shrink, social box starts to shrink, family stays pretty good. But that's how I get out of balance. You'll have this pattern you repeat.
Right.
And then it's okay, I got to do things to get back in balance, right? And I also then have to look at the triggers in each of those and the glimmers. What are the good things in each of those? And kind of do an analysis of, okay, what do I have control over of the triggers? Because some things I don't have control over.
Right.
We talk about your work life. There's things you have control over, things you don't have control over. And then you can make decisions about that. What can I control of the triggers? And what are the things I can't control? Being aware of that, number one, can be really helpful.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Very powerful. Because if I'm trying to change something I have no control over, I'm just adding more water to my bucket.
Exactly.
Totally stressing out, right? So I've got to be aware of that. So just a nice analysis and going through, okay, work. What are the triggers? What are the glimmers? What's working? What do I have control over?
Right.
And then things I have control over, I can make decisions about. You've done that.
Right.
Personally, you've done that. You made changes in your work box after you analyzed it,
Yes.
right? And it worked. Yeah.
For me, and I guess that's the thing, right? I've always been that type of person though that if I'm not happy, I could live in a shack and be happy as long as I feel, again, going back to the hierarchy of needs, as
Yeah.
long as I feel happy and safe, like that's what I need to thrive.
Right.
To me, material things are just that, material.
Right.
Those
Right.
are not, while they're nice, and yes, we have a comfortable life.
Right.
Right. For me, it was more important to focus on my family. We wanted to we had our kids. We wanted to raise them.
Right.
Instead of pawning them off on society, right? But that was our choice, and so I had to make that adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that was even more so. But you know what? I can see myself work hard, play hard has always been
Mm-hmm.
my philosophy.
That's that play box, right?
Yes.
You also have, and so many people quit playing when they become adults.
And I wonder why.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's not adult, right? We quit playing. And so we have to remember that we still have to play.
Yes.
Now, and the other thing we have to remember is that how we play will change as we develop.
Oh, sure.
We are constantly developmental creatures. I mean, we're always changing. So what I have interest in now is not going to be what I have interest in probably in 5 years.
Sure.
Right? And hobbies that I had 20 years ago, I don't have anymore.
Right.
So always, though, making sure that that play box has something in it and what are the things that work for me there.
Sure.
Same with social, right? What's the social interaction that I need? And that varies by person,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
We all have different levels of need for that.
Yes.
Right? So my wife is a very social person.
Mm-hmm.
She needs a lot of that, right? Me, not so much, right? So there's different levels of how much of that feels good and is safe, and how much of it then starts to become almost threat based, right? So you got to know what that is for yourself, and then say, okay, what do I need? What works for me? What are my triggers there? What are my glimmers there, right? So work, play, social, and then family. What's going on there?
Right.
You know, do I have enough contacts? Do I not? Am I meeting those needs? How's that all going? Are there issues there that need to be addressed?
Right.
Paying attention to that. So getting some balance in that helps us with that water level to keep us from being into fight or flight, or eventually into that dorsal vagal shutdown.
Sure.
And if any of those are way out of whack, water's going in the bucket, we're headed towards more burnout, more shutdown.
I mean, it's Titanic all over again. Just
Exactly.
At a level.
Yeah, at a personal level instead of a work level.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's still that it's still our nervous system.
So would you say that it is worth time for every individual, no matter who they are, what they are, where they're at in life, just take and assess all these things. Really assess, hey,
Self-awareness.
am I okay?
Self-awareness is so big, right? At a neurological level,
Sure.
where am I on this, what Deb Dana calls a ladder of the nervous system, right? So am I in ventral vagal? Am I in the fight or flight? Or am I in the shutdown?
Right.
One thing I don't know that I mentioned was when we were in shutdown, right, we've blown through fight or flight.
Yes.
One thing we need to be aware of is if I'm in shutdown, to come out of shutdown, I'm probably going to come back through some level of fight or flight before I get to ventral again.
Sure.
Okay? So we have to be aware of that, you know, so that we don't get too scared of that, and so that we can address it as we go through it, right? Because I'm probably, if I'm shut down and then I come back, let's say I'm burned out, and I'm starting to depersonalize, I'm not involved, I don't want to go to work, I just want to lay in bed, blah, blah, blah. If I start to come out of that, I'm probably going to have some of that irritability or
Sure.
that fear or that, it's okay. We just got to know where we are. Be aware of the
Sure, right.
be aware of the nervous system as we come and know what I need to do now to keep moving into ventral,
Sure.
right? Being aware of that, not being afraid of it, right? And
Right.
just being so aware. It's like I tell our PTSD people, you're not broken. Your nervous system's doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
Correct.
They feel like they're broken sometimes, right? They're not broken. Your nervous system's doing exactly what it's supposed to do given the experiences you've been through.
Exactly.
The question is, do you understand it? Make sure now you understand it, and now you know what to do about it.
Right.
Right? And once we do that, the fear is gone, and we've quit. Because fear of, as you well know as a physician, fear of our illness, fear of what's going on with me just adds a whole lot more water to the bucket,
Oh yeah.
a whole lot more stress.
Sure.
And if we understand it and we have a plan and we can deal with it, then that fear goes away and we're not adding more water to the bucket,
Right.
right? So we can better deal with it. So, I kind of look at burnout as very similar to PTSD,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
We've got this constant stressor and now we are beat down by it. And we're more alert now to that threat.
Mm-hmm.
So when it happens next time, we're reacting to that,
Sure.
and so we're very sensitive to it, which only compounds the problem.
Sure.
Yeah, but being aware of this really helps, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not going to prep because I feel horrible about it.
There's something wrong with me, and then we just spiral.
Right.
I
guess I love the fact that you bring up these boxes because that's so true. For me, it was very much I have to have that tangible time with my family.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess we have to make ourselves a priority.
And that's where I think the framework of thinking through work, play, social, family, spiritual can be really helpful because
Sure.
it at least gives you a direction to look.
Oh, I love the idea.
I can now look at this one and what can I control and what can I not control. And the stuff I can't control, let's let it go, man. I can't control it.
Sure.
But the things I can control, okay, what are my choices? And then I can start to make choices about that
Right.
for myself. Right? And you can do that in every arena, right? Which helps us then to have some control over all those.
Right.
Right?
And I think a lot of times we get overwhelmed with a system or a culture that dictates how we should be.
Right.
And it's kind of the way that's part of the reason why I've always dressed the way I have. It's kind of my way of rebelling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm very quiet, passive aggressive. I'm not going to conform, but I think it's very powerful to remember that at the end of the day, we have a choice of what we will and we will not do.
Right.
So we have to remember that, and I think it's just very powerful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and acting on that, and like I said, have just that self-awareness.
Sure.
Is so important, and that's why I think it's really important for people to understand that psychophysiology.
Mm-hmm.
Coming full circle back around to where we started. This is psychophysiology,
Sure.
right? It's the understanding how our physiology, how all that works, and how it affects us as human beings from a psychological, emotional standpoint.
Right.
And then what do we do about it?
Sure.
So
this idea of how are you feeling? Where are you?
Labeling it, right?
It's not some leftist theory.
Yeah,
like
right.
There's actually evidence, scientific proof that
exactly
it feeds back into our well-being.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the thing. Once you understand the science behind it,
right?
Then it starts to make sense. Once
Right.
you start to understand the physiology behind it, it starts to make sense. Then it's like, oh, that's why Tibetan monks have been doing this for 4,000 years.
Right. I've always called myself a Tibetan Catholic, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Kind of
Right.
oxymoronic.
Yeah.
But
But that's why, because it worked. But now we understand it better
Right.
from a scientific standpoint,
Right.
and it makes, and for our Western minds, that makes us feel better,
Sure.
you know.
So we're not totally anti-science, right?
That's right. No,
Right.
we're actually pro-science.
Right.
Right.
So I just have to laugh at the ironic statement of not playing as adults, because that's exactly what we're doing here.
Right.
Which
Exactly.
And we worked together for almost
Right.
4 years.
Yeah.
And again, you're part of my tribe, and it's
Right.
been really great.
It's been so good. It's been so good.
Right?
Yeah. It's been so good. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I've been using your song Second Time Around,
Right.
and that is from your first album.
Right.
Do you want to tell me about the title of the album, and then the song, and what was your inspiration?
Okay. So, first of all, I'm honored that you used the song for your podcast. Thank you. That's an honor. I appreciate you. That's neat. So, the album's called Stories from Another Life, right? So, the album was, I played, I wrote all but one of the songs, which was a John Mayer song. And I think I wrote all the other ones, if I'm remembering right. And played most of the instruments. There's a couple of guest artists in some of the songs. But took me a number of years to do. I've just kind of slowly put it together. And so the songs were written over a number of years. And they're all kind of stories, right? And so that's how I came. And so most of them are either stories that apply to my life, or there's something that I saw in somebody else, and so I wrote a song about. Sure. One or two are just made up. Okay, so like I have a song called "Keep on Walking, Amy."
Yeah, I heard that.
And that's about a prostitute walking the streets of South Broadway in Wichita, Kansas.
So Wichita was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was kind of hard to explain to my wife why I'm writing a song about a prostitute in Wichita, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think she still believes me that it's all just made up, but it is, honey, it is made up. So, but most of them have some basis in something, but they're just different stories. Sure. And so that's why I called the album Stories from Another Life, because they're just a lot of different stories. And Second Time Around, that you're using as the intro and outro on your podcast, I actually wrote that. If you remember the riots in Furman, Missouri, outside of St. Louis. Yeah. I was actually there at a conference when those were going on. Oh, wow. And I wrote that song after that. And Second Time Around is really about, because as we were going through that, whatever year that was, 10 years ago now, I don't know.
Has it already been
I don't know. I don't remember when exactly that happened. But as we were going through that, I just remember thinking, we've been doing this my whole life. Okay, I'm now 61 years old, and my whole life we have been going through racial strife. And how ridiculous is this? That this is the same thing I heard growing up as an 8, 9, 10-year-old and seeing it on the news, and Martin Luther King and all this stuff, right, in the 60s, and we're still doing it. And so I wrote that song because as a response to those Furman riots, and it's basically about we've all done this, you know, we've all made mistakes, we've all showed prejudice in one way or another. Sure. And that we all need to look in the mirror, and we all need to say, I can do better. Sure. And if we do that, the world will be better. And that's where that second time around comes in, is I can do it better this next time around. Sure. If I try. And that you can do better this next time around if you try. Sure. Right? And I had a friend that I'd met, Angelo Garibaldi, who did the rap portion of that. Right. And so that was a nice way to blend the two cultures,
Right.
and to put that all together. So yeah, I was really honored that Angela was willing to do that with that. So that's what that song's about. Yeah.
Because I'll tell you what, when I heard him, like, okay, I can relate to that,
Yeah.
right? Because you kind of think of life as a metamorphosis. You know, it's I
Right.
kind of relate everything to. So, I appreciate your explanation of the inspiration. I can
Mhm.
totally relate, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but you know, I kind of look at everything pre-medicine,
Right.
post-medicine,
Yeah.
right? Before med school and after med school. But as you get to this point in life, like I got to this point in life where I was just not recognizing myself.
Mhm.
I'm pretty open about that.
Yeah.
You know, I think I've been open about that from day one.
Right.
And it's because, yeah, it's something that should be normalized to talk about, but unfortunately it's not. And,
Right.
you know, I referred to podcast number 2.
Right.
But, you know, second time around is just like, okay, the first time I tried practicing medicine didn't work. Right? I mean, it was great.
Right.
Learned a lot of things, but I also learned a lot of things about myself. Like, I cannot, me personally, I'm just speaking for myself and not everybody else, but I personally cannot operate that 24/7 working.
Right.
Because I actually like people,
Mhm.
certain people, you know.
Yeah.
I love people. I love my family. Like that for me, that's huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to be married to my job.
Right.
So the second time around for me was, I gotta do better.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta do better. Not for my patients. I don't think there's any lack of there.
Mm-hmm.
But I gotta do better for myself.
For
I
yourself,
gotta do
for your
better
family.
for my
Mm-hmm.
family. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It totally fits. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate that. And that's really, you're right. That's really what that song's about.
Yeah.
Is we've all made mistakes, missteps, whatever you want to call them, throughout life, and we can do it differently.
Sure.
And there's always that opportunity to do it differently,
Sure.
and to move forward in a different kind of way that's more positive for us and for others.
Sure.
You know, yeah.
But again, it goes back to self-awareness, checking in, and doing all the steps you talked about. Where are we
Exactly.
on the scale? Where are we
Exactly.
on the spectrum?
Yep.
And then changing our response.
Exactly.
Hey, thank you so much for your time, because this has been an awesome afternoon.
It's been an awesome afternoon for me. Thanks for having me. It's so
Absolutely.
good to see you and to be with you again. So thank you.
Likewise, and this will not be the first nor the last.
I look forward to the next
Awesome.
one.
Well, thank you very much.
Remember, you are worthy, you are human. Take care.
We've all been guilty and made our own mistakes, said and done the things to perpetuate the hate. Hey, I think it's time to turn around. Hey, and begin again. Hey, I think that I can look in the mirror and start again. The second time around, the second time